You weren't a soldier, just a lonely old man with stories. That's what the nurse said as she pulled the curtains shut in room 107, her tone thick with indifference, unaware that the man lying beneath the thin VA blanket had once coordinated rescue operations across 3 borders without ever firing a shot. He didn't respond, didn't flinch, just kept his pale blue eyes fixed on the locked shadow box mounted on the wall across from his bed, its glass fogged from decades of silence. His name tag read Calvin Rhodes, civilian, and to most of the staff, he was a harmless relic, quiet, polite, maybe a little slow, someone who drank his tea at precisely 6 a.m. and hummed army cadence songs beneath his breath when he thought no one was listening. But the morning he didn't wake up, everything changed. A young orderly named Marcus, new to the floor and curious about the box, asked permission to open it, and what spilled out shattered the lie that had blanketed Calvin's final years. Inside, a perfectly preserved NATO field journal coded in military shorthand, 3 commendation medals with no digital record, and a letter, hand-signed in ink by General Karsten Muller himself, stamped with a now-defunct NATO Special Logistics seal. The medals weren't the shiny kind you display, they were black steel variants reserved for shadow-offs. The note read simply, "If Rhodes is gone, secure the base locks." He knew what they'd miss. Trust the notebook. And just like that, the man they dismissed as slow and sad was now the most talked-about name on Camp Holdridge's encrypted network. If you believe that even quiet hands can still protect the world long after the fighting ends, like and subscribe, because some warriors serve until their final breath, and this is one story you'll never forget. It began months earlier, before the shadow box, before the morning silence, back when Calvin Rhodes reported for his 0400 shift in the logistics wing of NATO's Camp Holdridge wearing the same olive windbreaker and khakis every day, the bottoms hemmed carefully over his orthopedic boots. He walked with a limp, a slow one, and carried a battered leather-bound ledger tucked beneath his arm, pages yellowed, handwriting crisp. Most didn't notice him. Those who did called him Clipboard Cow, a harmless civilian logistics clerk who sipped black tea from a thermos and double-checked things computers had already approved. He wasn't issued a weapon, didn't wear a rank, and was never invited to officer meetings. Some joke that he moved like a forgotten screensaver, always in the background, always alone. Captain Andre Ward, a loud, high-and-tight type who had never seen real combat but loved quoting doctrine, once laughed over lunch and said, "If that guy was any slower, we'd need a forklift just to get him out of the hallway." Rhodes heard it. He always did. But instead of flinching, he simply turned a page in his ledger, drew a red circle around a serial number, and kept moving. What none of them realized, not Ward, not the rotating platoons of multinational cadets, was that Rhodes had already served. Not on paper, not in public, but in a classified unit that handled supply chain integrity during the Balkan conflicts, and later during covert NATO joint force deployments. He had seen what happened when pallets went missing, when fuel mysteriously diverted to shell companies, when radio batteries expired days early in war zones. His job hadn't been to fight, it had been to prevent failure. And now, 25 years later, he was seeing all the same patterns emerge again at Holdridge. Boxes logged that never arrived. Drones checked out, never returned. Fuel discrepancies written off as admin errors. Rhodes wrote it all down, quietly. Every morning before anyone else arrived, he reviewed the last shift's logs manually and compared them with the previous quarter's trend lines. Then he checked the loading dock manifest, then the airfield ledger, then the surveillance logs. He'd been given access once during a contractor rotation, and no one ever thought to revoke it. No one paid attention to him, which was precisely why he caught what no one else did. It wasn't just theft, it was bleed. Someone inside was laundering parts, fuel, even drones, through forged manifests routed via private contractors. A slow, deliberate siphon. He started building a pattern. He didn't go to command. They wouldn't believe him. He knew better. So instead, he sent a sealed envelope every 2 weeks to a private mailing box in Berlin. The recipient? A logistics officer named Renata Grimm, now Colonel Grimm, who had once served under General Muller and owed Calvin her life. But no one at Holdridge knew that. So when the quarterly inspection team arrived and discovered that over $4.8 million in drone gear had gone unaccounted for, command panicked. Captain Ward blamed civilian errors, and within hours, Rhodes found himself summoned. Not for his insight, for blame. The same people who had laughed at his slowness were now pointing fingers at the old man with the notebook. And that's when everything shifted. General Karsten Muller's name appeared on the encrypted call logs. And his only request? I want Rhodes in the room. No one speaks until he does. Everyone froze. Rhodes walked in, silent, notebook in hand. Pages flipped. Serial numbers matched. Flight logs referenced. Fuel tallies aligned. By the time he was done, the stolen gear had a full trail, and every officer in the room knew the man they'd mocked had just dismantled an entire black market siphon ring with nothing but a pencil and patience. Captain Ward? Court-martialed. Free contractors? Banned from NATO sites. And Rhodes? He just nodded, closed his notebook, and walked out before the applause could start. But the part no one saw, the part that mattered most, was what he did next. He returned to the logistics wing, as always, at 0400. Same boots. Same windbreaker. Same ledger. Because for Calvin Rhodes, duty wasn't about medals. It was about knowing when the systems fail and being steady enough to catch them. And that's what he did. Until the day he didn't wake up. They thought it was over, that the old man with the notebook had his one moment, dismantled a few corrupt names, and disappeared like a rumor. But Camp Holdridge didn't understand yet. Calvin Rhodes hadn't just exposed a scandal. He had triggered a chain reaction buried deeper than anyone realized. In the weeks after his quiet death, the NATO base's rhythms began to falter, like a ship adjusting to a new current. The morning mailroom started finding odd deliveries, boxes of spare parts that had never been ordered, crates of drone batteries marked urgent but never locked. Logistics officers blamed the system, until Private Singh, a greenhorn clerk barely 2 months out of tech school, opened an unfiled manifest sealed in wax and found a slip of paper in Rhodes' unmistakable block script. Check Bay 12. Cameras still looped. That's when the ripple became a wave. Singh, too scared to approach command, passed the note to Colonel Grimm, who had just returned from Brussels after briefing General Muller's office. Within 72 hours, she quietly opened a back-channel audit team, low-profile and multilingual, posing as tech support. What they found was worse than anyone predicted. The thefts Rhodes had exposed were only one branch of a wider network, deliberate, silent bleed across 5 NATO sites, run by a shell company disguised as a UN equipment vendor. Rhodes had known. Of course he had. That's why, buried in the back of his notebook's final pages, coded in analog shorthand, were names, places, patterns. Every officer who had ever brushed him off was now studying his ledger like scripture. But that wasn't the story that gripped the base. What shook them, what made them change was the footage. Because inside the encrypted flash drive left in Rhodes' desk drawer, the one most people assumed was a backup archive, was a 38-minute video. No introduction. No rake. Just a timestamp. 1 week before his death. Calvin, seated alone in the dim break room before dawn, facing the camera like it was a soldier under his command. He didn't smile. He didn't blink much. Just spoke in that calm, methodical way he always had. If you're watching this, I'm gone. I figured as much. So here's what I saw that you didn't. For the next half hour, he laid out everything. The falsified invoices, the compromised vendors, the way the base surveillance had been intentionally looped every Thursday night between 0200 and 0300. He didn't accuse anyone by name. You didn't need to. They want you to focus on speed, he said softly. But you miss things when you rush. That's what war taught me. That's what command forgot. He ended with one sentence that silenced even the highest brass. Don't call me a hero, just call me what I was. The last line that actually paid attention. The video went viral inside military channels, encrypted but shared, quoted in briefings. Commanders began referencing the Rhodes Standard, not as a joke, but as a principle. Check it twice, listen to the slow one, and never ignore the quiet hands. Even General Muller reposted the video internally with only 3 words. He was right. But recognition came late. The same Captain Andre Ward who'd mocked Rhodes to his face was now facing court testimony in Brussels for dereliction and breach of operational integrity. RIM's internal report, based almost entirely on Rhodes' ledgers and annotations, was presented at NATO's Eastern Asset Security Summit as a gold standard framework for civilian integrated oversight. And yet, despite all of that, the base felt hollow. Because the man who saved them wasn't there to see it. Not until the week after the footage surfaced, when the email hit the inboxes of every officer and contractor at Holdridge. Memorial detail at 0600. Logistics wing. Mandatory. Most expected a flag ceremony. A half-hearted gesture. Instead, they found an entire wall restructured into what Command quietly called the ledger room. Inside, Rhodes' original desk sat untouched, glassed in, surrounded by printouts of his handwritten notes, maps, flowcharts, timestamps, some pinned, some projected, some marked with red circles no one yet understood. At the center of the room, beneath a soft light, stood his notebook, open to the final page, where 6 words now echoed through every hallway. I saw it. You didn't. Fix it. Colonel Grimm stood before the wall in dress blues, pants folded behind her back. She didn't speak for long. This wasn't about logistics, she said, voice firm but raw. This was about whether or not we still have the capacity to listen to the people we overlook. She paused, then looked directly at Singh, now standing tall in front row. This was about whether truth can still come in worn boots and careful notes. That night, Command officially renamed Logistics Room B to Road Station. They didn't do it for PR. They did it because they finally understood what they had missed. And days later, when NATO's encrypted net released a new internal security protocol codename or .steady, it was based entirely on Calvin's final ledger entries. And that's when the message arrived. Not from within NATO. Not from Command. From Karsten Muller himself. Handwritten. Delivered by military courier. Inside, a single line addressed to Rhodes' estate. He was the best analyst I ever had. And we left him at a folding desk. There was no parade. No fanfare. Just a new plaque at the gate that read, Enter steady. Observe twice. Speak when it matters. And beneath it, etched in steel, Rhodes saw first. They never called it a ceremony. Not officially, no emails were sent, no orders were issued. But at precisely 0500 hours on a fog-choked Friday, every personnel shift on Camp Holdridge began moving as if pulled by something invisible. Something sacred, and by 0515, nearly the entire logistics wing stood in complete silence outside Building A5, where a single wooden bench had been installed the night before beneath a plaque no one had seen until that morning. In honor of the last to notice. Calvin Rhodes, analyst, patriot, sentinel. The fog rolled low over the concrete as boots shifted quietly in place, not in parade formation, not in rank, just a spontaneous gathering of those who finally understood who they had lost. No commander spoke. No trumpets played. Instead, Private Singh stepped forward, still clutching the same notebook Rhodes had once carried like a shield, and placed it gently on the bench, sealed in a weatherproof case now labeled classified, active use. Because his words weren't finished, they were still working. The same notebook that had cracked an internal theft ring, exposed 3 international shell vendors, and rewritten NATO's base audit protocol, was now considered live intelligence. Referenced by High Command and quietly circulated through encrypted channels as Rhodes' methodology, CivSEC 01. But even as policies changed, even as the base adopted new check-in procedures and nighttime double verification on fuel inventories, none of it changed the ache, that hollow space left not by a title, not by a rank, but by a presence people had mistaken for background noise. What haunted most of them wasn't the fact that Rhodes had been right, it was that he had been right alone. Until the end. Until now. And yet somehow, even from beyond the grave, he was still serving. Because when a NATO convoy went dark near the Polish border a week after the memorial, scrambling multiple support teams and drawing panic up the chain of command, it wasn't a tech lead who cracked the solution, it was Singh. Flipping through Rhodes' ledger and pointing to a red-circled timestamp labeled Drop Zone Com Shadow Gdansk Relay Delay 7 seconds. Echo drift? Recalibrate. The fix worked. The convoy reconnected. A blackout averted. A headline avoided. That entry had been dated 7 years prior. And it kept happening. Again and again, Rhodes notes, once dismissed as obsessive overkill, predicted outages, shipment inconsistencies, satellite blind spots. One Italian logistics officer who never met Rhodes said during a security summit, "It's like he left a trail for us to follow. Like he knew we'd finally need him, just not while he was alive." They weren't wrong. The more they dug, the more they realized. Rhodes hadn't just been documenting. He had been teaching, writing in patterns designed to be discovered. Reverse engineered. Used. And at the heart of all of it was his favorite phrase, scribbled in margins like gospel. Slow is still. Still sees more. By month's end, NATO officially adopted Operation Sentinel Quiet, an initiative to retrain civilian integration analysts using Rhodes' notes as the core curriculum. Singh was promoted. Grimm was reassigned as program lead. But the final piece, the moment that turned legacy into myth, happened far from base, under the vaulted ceilings of NATO headquarters in Brussels, where a folded letter arrived by diplomatic pouch, no return address. Marked only with an old unit insignia from the Balkan days. Inside, a single photograph. A young Calvin Rhodes, unsmiling, standing in muddy fatigues beside a grizzled General Karsten Muller, both flanked by two other men whose names had long been redacted from NATO's active history. On the back, he kept us alive. You almost let him disappear. When the governing committee met that evening, no one argued the motion. The Rhodes Doctrine was passed unanimously. Every base in the network would now have a Rhodes Watch officer, not a commander, not an enforcer, just someone quiet, observant, steady, someone the room might ignore, but who would never stop watching. Camp Holdridge was the first to implement it, and Arya Singh, now Sergeant Singh, sat at that desk every morning at 0400, coffee steaming, ledger open, just like the man who came before her. And beside her, pinned to the corkboard above her terminal, was Calvin's final handwritten message, pulled from the sealed folder the VA nurse had overlooked the day he died. 6 words, crooked and fading but unmistakable. Don't be fast. Be right. Always. She read it every morning. And the base, once so sure it had no use for an old man with a limp, now moved just a little slower, just a little more carefully, just enough to honor the man they'd never really seen, until it was almost too late. Because Rhodes never raised his voice, never asked for recognition, never even corrected the ones who laughed. He didn't need to. His truth outlasted them. His silence taught them. And in the end, that was his victory. Quiet. Steady. Final.